Today I'm very excited to talk with Julia Laurent, costume designer and fashion industry expert about sustainable fashion and the fashion and design industry in general. Um, Julia, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself.
So, hi everybody, this is Julia Laurent. I am actually formerly was studying in London. So I'm a graduate from the Central St. Martin's School of Design. That's actually quite renowned in the world for fashion design. So what I majored in was bespoke tailoring. And I was really interested in historical costuming because in terms of fashion industry, there's many different things you can major in. So I did a lot on crafting and tailoring, particularly menswear. So that's actually something I really love and specialized in. But of course, we were trained in all aspects. So we do women's wear as well. So what I ended up doing was on the side, I was working two jobs. I was an intern for the longest time at Next Models Management, in which I had really great hands-on experience working on London Fashion Week, a couple of seasons actually. I did about 3 seasons with them. So it's a total of about 1.5 years I was with Next Models. And then thereafter, I was also working subsequently with Miu Miu, Prada Group. So it's, Miu Miu is part of Prada, but it's just like more hip side of Prada. People tend to think that they're different companies, but they're actually the same one. So I was working for Miu Miu, first in a store, and then I got an internship to work with them in the back office in London, where I did a lot of merchandising, and I did color designing with them. So just like a bit of experience on what the industry really was like. But I think London Fashion Week really was the eye-opener. Also because Next Models gave me a lot of exposure. I was able to work very closely with some of the really famous models on building their portfolio. So I wasn't just an intern, I was actually on the floor working with them, helping them to construct and the marketing materials and all these sort of things. So some of the people I come across was I think Alex Chung, she was there. Pixie Geldof was also someone I came in touch with. Shu Pei. I know people may not know Shu Pei very well, but she's actually Karl Lagerfeld's formerly favorite Asian model for Chanel catwalk. So if you just search Shu Pei, she comes out, really close friend. Also Judson Berza. He went on to win Survivor. So I helped all these people build their portfolios. That was before they got ultra famous. That was just right before they got the hit. So there's just some people that I got to know during my time in London, and they're really nice people, just working behind the scenes. I'm a nobody. but these people have been such great, down-to-earth, really famous people, but very down-to-earth people I've met at the agency. So London was a great experience. Bumped into a lot of people there. And I think fashion in London, really, there wasn't anywhere else I could have gained the same amount of exposure if it wasn't because it was London. So I really do highly recommend that if anyone has the interest, do give London a try. If you think that Paris is a little bit too crowded, Paris is really hard to get into because you need to speak French, and I can't speak French. But Paris is great for networking if you're good in French. But otherwise, London is always a go-to. Yes,
and
so
London is a hotspot for all the fashion trends and the beauty news and all the upcoming trends, right?
Yes, I think it's a one-stop place where you get everybody congregating together to, I think, more about business of fashion. Not so much in terms of couture, where we talk about ready to wear is more London, where made to measure is more Paris. So it's kind of like we split them into two. So London is more ready to wear, fast fashion, or designer fashion, but really for the streets. So it's really like you get in, you get your stuff, you get out. You also meet a lot of amazing couturiers like Rolf and Rosso. I know that's not really a brand people do know, but Rolf and Rosso is huge in the UK. They were started by an Australian-British couple, and they have been the forelines of what you call ready to wear couture. I know it sounds funny, but basically they're couturiers, but they're able to make it ready to wear. So you can just go to the store, get yourself measured, and they'll just alter it straight for you on the same day. So that's really amazing. It's a new concept. Yeah.
It's that fast. It doesn't even take a week or 2 weeks. It's on the spot.
On the spot. So you can actually, I know a lot of princesses from Dubai, from the UAE, who like to go there and they get themselves, just walk into the store at Harrods. They find the dress they love, and then immediately send for alterations, and it's back in the same day to use in the evening for their dinners and stuff. So that's actually really quite cool. Rolf and Rosso, that's something that people can really look out for, Rolf and Rosso. Yeah.
Wow. And just out of curiosity, we are not talking about hundreds of dollars price range. We're talking about thousands and maybe 10,000s of dollars.
10,000 is not really cutting the line. I think we're talking about 2,800. So you're talking probably about $280,000 for a dress.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Just to be made haute couture on the day that you really want. Wow.
Couture usually starts at 6 digits. I mean, the cheapest you can find is probably 80,000 pounds. And that's a couture dress price. I think an average dinner dress is about 80,000 pounds and above. So if you would like to get higher dresses, like really made to measure, where you can get all the accessories and embroidery, they easily chalk up to about $1 million. So couture, it's really, haute couture is really for a very, very few people in this world. So that was what I loved and what I majored in making and all that. So that's pure craftsmanship, and that's what I studied in the UK. So I do have the skills. I do have the skills to do it, but it takes a lot of man hours. So it's really team effort. Couture is not something you can do alone, unfortunately. You can, of course, make a dress, but all the other toppings or accessories and so on and so forth, and selecting materials and all that, they all go into the cost. So people ask, oh, what is haute couture? It's basically art. You're actually not buying fashion, you're buying a piece of art. So it's really expensive, I would say. And the industry is getting more and more popular again. There was a period of time where there was a slump. But in the last 5 or 6 years, I've seen, also because the rise of the Asian dynasties of commerce. So you can see like a lot of Asians actually going into haute couture. So there's a huge market now again, particularly London, because Paris, you need to speak French. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get your requests across. So because of that, London has become a hot spot for ready-to-wear and haute couture. So yeah, I think really it's not a bad place to go to if you like to just dabble in a bit of fashion and try and find people and network in London. You get your hands quite really easily in the fashion industry. Yeah.
Absolutely. So having seen fashion from those different angles, how would you define what is fashion to you?
Wow, what is fashion to me? Oh, many different levels. I think for me, style and trend are the two things I really go for in fashion. Wearing it, for example, it's not just wearing shirts every day. It's not even about being appropriate. For me, true and real fashion, it's about collecting. It's about really going into a piece of art and loving a piece of dress for the way that it is. So it's not just wearing for every day. It's actually really about a sense of belonging to what you want to see yourself in. So fashion for me really is art. I think it's really, really quite difficult for those of us who don't really make your own dresses to understand this concept. But if you do start getting into making your own dress, you start realizing that you're actually really proud of your own work. And sometimes you want to try different styles and different things. So that's the reason why I started to learn fashion, was to make my own, was to be able to create my own patterns, create my own piece of art, sort of. Haute couture is really on another level. But what I love about haute couture is also that there is no wastage. Why do I say there's no wastage? Because every single piece of couture is not like fast fashion. It's not like ready to wear, where you just buy and you go, this is no longer appropriate to me, I'm just going to check it off. You don't do that, because haute couture costs so much. And also it's every piece of effort and every piece of craftsmanship that goes into this. So people actually have them, transfer ownership on them, and they get reused over and over again. So they're like pieces of art that gets passed through different people, and its value only increases over time. Its value doesn't decrease, unlike ready-to-wear fashions or fast fashion as you know it. So stuff like H&M and all that sort of things, we wear them for one season and then we throw them out. But for haute couture, that will never happen. Ready-to-wear versus made-to-measure, the industries are completely different. They're two sides of the same coin called fashion, but they're very, very much two sides. So I think that normal people tend not to prefer tailoring their own clothes because they feel that's too much of a cost, without understanding that actually stuff that you make by hand actually lasts a lot longer, and the quality that you get from something that you actually measure up and make, that quality lasts. And that quality is something people prefer to invest in. So buying clothes is an investment, sort of. It's an art and it's an investment. And that's what fashion is to me. Yes.
Okay. So you also mentioned that you started studying, you wanted to study fashion because you wanted to learn how to make patterns yourself, how to sew something yourself. So when was the first time that you sewed something or you designed something in your life?
Wow. Designing something, I started designing them when I was 12. When I actually started making something, that was the first time I got to fashion school. Because before I went to fashion school, I probably only knew how to sew buttons. I know it's odd. I tried to sew my own stuff, of course. I made my own costumes because costuming, I know people say, what's costumes got to do with fashion? Basically, costumes are a higher level of fashion. So whatever you wear in stores are made by machines. So that's pretty straightforward. You know, patterns are very straight cut and they're very modern. They're made according to Victorian patterns. So they're all very curvy and everything is just set for you. Whereas costuming is a whole nother level. So if you want to do haute couture, you have to be trained in costuming because that is where the real technique really comes in. So I went to major in costuming because of that, just to learn techniques. And really, costuming is a whole nother game. If you know John Galliano's no longer with Dior, but Galliano was really famous because his first ever graduate collection was on the Rococo period, which was the 18th century period. So all his dresses were made with 18th century patterning. Now, when we talk about patterning is kind of like a metric system to measurements. So if you don't actually have the correct system, your clothes are going to not look the right way. So if you try to make an ancient dress based on modern patterns, it's not going to look like an ancient dress. So we need to go back in time and actually learn the patterning and learn the techniques of how they made it back then in order to create something that's kind of an in-between. So Galliano was really famous in taking and digging up all these historical old patterns, whether from the 40s, 50s, 1800s, 1700s. He was really good at picking them up and modernizing them. So he's finding in between modern patterns and the ancient ones, and then creating new fashion from that. So that's what we call renewal, right? Like a Renaissance type of fashion. That sort of fashion is really, really used today in haute couture. Not so much your ready to wear, because ready to wear is standard patterning, as we know it. You know, for today's wear, you just wear it. But the stuff that really requires skill is costuming. So what I do costuming for is practice work, to keep up my skill. Because usually you never really make them in daily life. I mean, why would I make a dress that's going to cost me £20,000 and then I'm never going to be able to wear on the streets, maybe for an event one year. So because of that, I do a lot of costuming just to keep up my skills. I do cosplay on the side just so that I have a venue to, you know, dress up, have a chance to keep my skills as I go about my daily life. But apart from that, I think when people talk about say we go back to costuming or we go back to say fast fashion versus haute couture fashion, it really is art versus wastage. I think that really is the counterbalance between the two. I think really would like people to investigate a little bit more into the clothes that they wear, try to support a bit more on haute couture or make to measure dresses rather than throw-out fashions, because that's something that you can keep with you for a much longer period of time, and it only increases in value. It doesn't go down. Yeah.
And if you cannot afford the haute couture, you can still get the tailor made or even fast fashion tailored for you, right?
Yes, you can get tailored clothing, but tailored clothing is more like, not everybody can afford couture, that's for sure. But tailored clothing is still made with really good techniques. So like say menswear, for example, bespoke suits, as opposed to you going to a store and buying one off the rack. Buying one off the rack, you know, you can try. There's a lot of options for you, but that's really not going to last. In terms of lasting, when we talk about lasting, it's also in the way the clothes are being made. Some of the styles that you can request when you make to measure, instead of buying off the rack, are styles that are classy and they're styles that do not go out of fashion very easily. What it means is that your tuxedo is going to look good 10 years from now, provided you keep your body. Of course, you know,
So
you got to maintain your body shape. But that suit is going to look so timeless as compared to something you buy off the rack. And that is the one true rule to every single piece of couture I've ever seen. They may go out of fashion in a way, in terms of the way it ages, but that still has that timeless feel to them, as opposed to stuff you just buy off the racks. Because those clothes, you need to understand in the fashion industry, when we talk about fast fashions, we are not making those to keep. We are making them to channel new demand. So we actually do want people to throw their clothes out just so you can buy new ones. And that is the ugly truth of fashion that no one tells you. So fast fashion or stuff you don't make to measure are not going to be made with timelessness in mind. They're going to be made with throw out in mind. So if you were to think about circular fashion or being fashion conscious, made to measure will always be a good investment. Yeah.
So that's like a go-to or a rule to have in your mind while considering your fashion purchase.
Yes, timelessness.
Okay.
I think timelessness is something a lot of people pay for. You would say that some of the top celebrities, for example, I know so many of them, if you were to ask them, so what's your wardrobe like? They can show you some fancy wardrobes, of course, because most of their stuff are sponsored, but they do show you some fancy wardrobes. To the end of the day, they will still say there are maybe only 10 pieces in my wardrobe that I absolutely love and will absolutely keep. Only 10. That's because these are like the most classic pieces, the most timeless ones. And I do highly recommend people to practice that you have these 10 pieces that you know will forever be in your wardrobe and will be with you for the next 20 years. And timelessness really costs a lot in the fashion industry, as opposed to something that you can just wear and then be like, okay, I'm off next season. Yeah, so.
But if you sum the costs, we wouldn't say that fast fashion is cheaper in 10 years period. Because if you count all the purchases and disposals and purchase again, it probably sums up to the same amount of money.
Yes, it actually does. But there's a little bit of a balance between that, right? You would like to look trendy as well, rather than saying, I have one piece I'm wearing all the time. So
that's true.
I think fast fashion is something that you keep up with. But really, it's also something that you have to be aware of when you buy. Because if not, you're just going to be raking up a lot of purchases and then only to find out that 1 year from now, you're going to be throwing them. Whereas for made-to-measure clothes, there's certain clothing that you would like to have in your forever be wardrobe. And those are the ones I would definitely get tailored and get measured. Yeah. I know the difference in stuff that's made mass fashion. And I know the stuff that's been made with love, really tailored and measured to you. Those things just have a different feel to them, even when you wear them. They just look different. And from far away, you know, someone says, well, there isn't much difference between the suits. I'd be like, yeah, well, if I were to put two together, if I were to show you a bespoke suit that costs like £5,000 versus one that's just off the racks, they also cost £5,000. If you stand next to each other with the same thing, you can see the difference right away. It is not something visually obvious when it comes to photos and videos, but live, when you see the person live, those things do matter so much. They can be the same cost, exactly the same cost. I know suits off the racks that cost about 5,000 quid, but you know, if you make to measure, those things are made to last. The stitches are made to last. A lot of them are done by hand. A lot of people ask, what's the difference between hand and machine? The machine sews perfectly, beautifully, straight and flat. But by hand, you get some, sometimes irregularities. But it's in these irregularities that sometimes you get a little bit more spark. I know it's a little bit funny to mention, but it's almost going towards a bit of arty-farty level. But when you have these things that are made by hand, the hand sewing of human beings lasts very much longer than what's been done by machine. Because the machine stitches them very flatly. So you can actually control how hard or how soft you need some stitches to be. Whereas a human hand can do that, provided a very crafted one, a very skilled one, will give you a stitch that's far more perfect and far more lasting than whatever the machine can do. And that I've seen for myself. So it's something that it's hard to explain verbally, of course, but it's seeing is believing. So if you have a chance and you can go to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, you can have a look at the Dior collection, for example, which is unfortunately gone now, but they do have very constant fashion exhibits at Victoria and Albert Museum, the V&A. I highly recommend anyone who's interested in fashion to go into the V&A, have a look at all these old collections. You can see for yourself what we mean by made to measure by hand versus those that are made mass fashion by machine. They are very different. Yes.
I have actually visited that exact museum, and now as you mentioned those things, it makes much better sense for me to reflect back in time and really consider the art piece that I was looking at. Of course, I read a lot about every single garment, but now hearing it from you, it gives a different perspective on that. But you also mentioned costs. So let's say a costume, for a bespoke costume, is the production cost much higher than a regular fast fashion costume?
It really depends. It would be, of course, because man hours cost money. And especially, say, if you talk about suiting, I would say Italy, for example, has some of the most skilled crafters I've ever seen. Italy has always been a stronghold of craftsmanship. Not because they're good in leatherware, but the fact that Italian craftsmen are still historically some of the most experienced. They know what quality is. They know what a high standard fashion quality means. Whereas many other cultures I've been to, say, like even in London, for example, when we see craftsmen working, they still do not match up to the Italians when it comes to that. There is no contention. Italy has some of the best. So when you go to Italy and you have a chance, they're very closed doors. It's a bit hard to find them. They're always usually on the countrysides. But when you do find them, have a look at the way they do the bags, especially leatherware. Have a look at the way they do suiting, selection of fabrics and so on. Napoli, for example, is really famous for fabrics when it comes to suits. Historically, they have been very, very good. It's called a trained eye. It's intuition. It's fashion intuition, it's fashion experience, supply chain. Also, because of all that, the Italians have always been very high on their craft. That said, these things, whatever they have to offer, you do pay them for their work because of all this experience that really goes into the suits and so on. If you have a suit made by them, it's so obvious it's made by them, as opposed to a craftsman from France or a craftsman from England. Everyone has their own little cultural quirks when it comes to that. So when you pay a craftsman to do it, that money really goes towards their experience. That's something you can never get in mass fashion. As to what the difference is, seeing is believing. I know it's a bit difficult to explain, but seeing is believing when it comes to that. So whatever you feel that money goes to mass fashion, have a look again. Because sometimes mass fashion, like I know a few good suit companies, say Tailor Sweden is one of them. We all know Tailor Sweden. We know J. Lindenberg. It's also pretty good, local brands. But really, if you put that suit and a made-to-measure Italian suit and you put them on, the cost may be somewhat the same. You'll be really surprised. You'll be really, really surprised. Sometimes you buy a really expensive suit from Tailor Sweden, and you can go to Napoli and get one tailored. And you ask, what's the difference? My difference is one has experience and it's pretty obvious to see, and the other is just mass fashion. It's branded fashion, but it's still mass fashion.
Yes.
Yeah, that's seeing is believing when it comes to that. And when you put it on, the feeling is very different too. Yeah.
So would you, in a way, advise everyone to just try out a high-end fashion brands just to see how it feels, and maybe that would encourage them to do some other purchasing decisions?
Yes, actually, I would very much highly recommend, highly recommend. If you have a chance, step into a few fashion stores such as Prada, Miu Miu for girls. Have a look at the way the dresses are being made. Have a look at, these are also still somewhat we call mass fashion, right? Somewhat. I wouldn't say they're all made to measure. I wouldn't say that they're that. But the techniques used to make some of these fashions I've seen for myself are very, very close to those made to measure. We're not saying to go in there and buy branded mass fashion. We're saying to go in there and have a feel for what quality is, because that is something you need attunement to. Once you have that attunement, then try out some stores or some tailors that can actually make to measure to that degree. And then you can actually discuss with them, what are the materials you would like to have? What are the threads you would like to use? You can actually go as far as to customize your thread count. So these things all really count into how the final product is going to look and feel on you. So it's a lot of science and a lot of art when it comes to having something made to measure. You can have anything customized when it comes to made to measure. So those things do last. As opposed to if you just go into a mass fashion store and be like, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. I'm just going to find something that looks good on me. You can try something that you look good on. Take a picture of that. Say, this is the look I like. And then go to a quality store. Go to a brand store that actually makes clothes really well from one of these Italian designers and so on. Have a try on them. And then go to a make-to-measure person and say, could you recreate this for me? How much would that cost? You will be extremely surprised that you can find some really good deals out there for make-to-measure. It doesn't have to be haute couture, because not any of us can just afford couture. I mean, couture is only for the 0.1% of this world. There's so few people that can afford couture, not even myself. I mean, I can make one for myself, but the materials itself is going to cost me. I have seen fabrics, silk, that goes for £28,000 a meter. I know that's a lot of money. £28,000, 1 meter. You'd be like, what is that 1 meter of $28,000? It's basically silk that's been dyed, created to a really, really high degree. And these silks are such good quality that they do not deteriorate for hundreds of years. So they can last for hundreds of years. If you were to bury them in a vacuum-packed environment, these silks will last thousands of years. So that was the kind of materials that were being used for royalty in ancient times that you have heard of, like in China and so on. These are some of the quality materials. There are fabrics out there that cost £28,000 per meter. And those are the kind of materials they use in haute couture that you see on these, couture summer collections, spring collections. They are not cheap materials that you see, which is the reason why some dresses rake up to about 6-7 digits. They do cost that much. So when you ask, what can I do then to play a part in this? I would say, do support made to measure. Don't support mass fashion as much. As I mentioned, you can have 10 pieces in your wardrobe that's going to be timeless and have those made to measure. That can always be what we call go-to pieces. Whereas the other ones, you can then look at and try to buy consciously the other types of clothing. That said, I think it's quite important to highlight to people how much wastage goes into mass fashion. Let's just give you an example. A roll of thread that you buy in Stuff and Steel and all these fabric stores, one roll of thread will take up to 25 liters of water to make one roll of thread.
Wow.
That's a lot of water. That's a lot of water that just goes to the waste. And it's not something we can even recycle. You cannot recycle that water because it's so toxic. That thing just goes out into the oceans. And you're talking 25 liters of water for each roll. Not even 2.5, 25. So when I first heard that, it stunned me a little bit because I'm a costume maker and also a fashion designer. We use threads like there's no tomorrow. What do we mean by that? When you go on a machine, yes, you sew in a machine. A lot of threads get pulled out each and every time you try to cut the thread. And so people just pull them, not conscious about how much thread we're actually using, just for convenience, just for speed, just for mass fashion. Whereas in make to measure, our threads cost a lot of money. These threads that we use are high quality ones. And so when we do hand sewing, there's a lot less wastage when it comes to using our threads because we can cut them at really, really thin pieces. Yeah, we can just leave maybe a little bit like this, and that's all we need to leave out before we finish a stitch. Whereas on the machine, you literally have to leave it like that much before you can finish a stitch properly on the machine. So there's so much more wastage just on thread alone that goes into mass fashion as opposed to make to measure. So if you really are a more environmental conscious person, do support make to measure clothing. They also do last a long, long time, as opposed to if you just buy something and throw it the next year. So that alone says a lot about the mass fashion industry. I myself like to have pieces that I keep. So I do have about 10 pieces that I like to go to, as mentioned. And those ones I make to measure. I do not buy them off the racks. Yeah.
And what would those pieces be? Are these jeans and the blouse, or are these dresses and some special occasion
Yeah.
clothing?
Unfortunately, jeans is a very polluting industry. Unfortunately, jeans is not able to be made to measure because denims in themselves have to be synthetically created. So because of that, denim is one of the most actually detrimental pieces of fabrics created for the environment. So be very aware if you're to buy denims. Of course, that's not to say that you shouldn't buy jeans, but I would reduce the number of jeans if you are more fashion conscious. The pieces I do have are definitely one-piece dresses because they're very, very, flat and very easy to put on and very easy to match with other accessories. So I have 3 pieces of one-piece dresses that are made to measure, and I have 3 blazers that are also made to measure. So usually I would say blazers or jackets, pieces of dresses, pants, for example, shirts as well, if you like shirts. But unfortunately for females, shirts tend to not be that good a deal because shirting for women, unfortunately, are not like menswear. Why do I say that? The patterning for female shirts has been based off a men's pattern. So it's been based off a Victorian men's pattern. It does not fit the women's figure that well. So we still need a little bit of fashion revolution when it comes to women's shirts. Let's just put it this way. They were based off a men's pattern. They're not created for females. So because of that, when women wear shirts, some shirts just don't fit us very well when it comes to the arms or the collar. You will start feeling a little bit of pull here and there. It's pretty difficult to find a perfect woman's shirt. That's not because it's our fault. It's not because the pattern is wrong. It's because the pattern was based off a men's wear pattern, not a women's one. Whereas for dresses, they were derived from women's dresses, ancient times. So you're talking like Rococo times, and you're talking also Victorian times. Those are the dresses that women came up with on our own. So these are dresses that fits us in terms of the cuts and everything. Transferring that to a suit, it doesn't really quite work for us. So I know it's a little bit different, but when we go into historical research on patterning, you realize that a lot of women's wear patterns that we wear today, the clothes we wear today, are all based off men's wear patterning. And because of that, it's not extremely flattering for a female body at all. Yeah.
Is there a way to correct that these days?
I wouldn't say a way to correct that. I would say for me, whenever I do make costumes or make dresses for myself, I do like to go back to a historical women's pattern and then modernize it to how I prefer it today, so that the dresses are a little bit more let when it comes to the chest area, a bit more tight on the waist area, because women have curves. Yeah, the men's wear patterns don't have curves. If you look at a woman's shirt, it's been fitted sort of like, the formal shirts that women wear. It's kind of like a flat pattern that you try to create curves in. So it doesn't really look that very good on us, to be honest. It's not very, very comfortable for us. So what I tend to do is to throw myself away from that. And I try not to wear shirts as much because it really doesn't fit me very well. It's not comfortable. Over time, they're not that very timeless either, because the women's shirts tend to be a little bit, how do I mention? When men wear suits, they look very tight. They look very straight and they look very neat. Yeah? Whereas for women, when we wear suits, something just doesn't feel quite right. It just feels as if like the woman's been squashed into that and have to maintain her body with that. And when you move around in a suit, sometimes your shirts get shifted and stuff. It doesn't have that tight feel that a man would have. Yeah, so that's where we feel a little bit of problems when it comes to it's just purely patterning. It's just purely patterning. For that matter, I would prefer that a female wears pattern clothing that's suitable for us. So whether it be round collars or be high collars or it be anything that is more suited to us, rather than actual men's collar sort of thing.
That's true.
Yeah, I know it's a bit difficult to say, but we're essentially 2 very different bodies. So we're more curvy, the men's more straight. So it's good to wear something that's a bit more flattering for us. Those are the pieces that I would prefer to make to measure, for sure, because they stay in my wardrobe for a lot longer, and I can wear them through time, through age. It doesn't matter if I'm 60, whether I'm 20, those clothes will still be applicable to me. Yeah.
That's true. Well, I would like to get back a little bit to when we were talking about made to measure.
Yes.
You said that it is a lot of labor intensive, but when I look into mass fashion as well, we have a huge industry in Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, where there are a lot of manpower involved even these days still.
Yeah.
My question to you would be, why is this situation in 21st century like that? Why didn't we move towards technological solutions into mass production?
Yeah. It is, for those of us who do make clothes, you understand that fashion itself is still a very labor-intensive piece of work. It is impossible for a machine to 100% recreate the shirts and dresses that we wear. Everything has to be made by a human being. That's because there is no machine in this world. They can cut out the patterns for you using laser cutters and so on, but there is no one that can actually feed it edge to edge, seam to seam on a machine as of today. It's quite difficult to design machines that can do that and do it perfectly. It is hard. It is very difficult. Why do I say that? Let's just say women's wear, for example. We, as mentioned, very curvy. And because of these curves, there are some tight ones, especially when we say the princess seam, princess line, that goes from the chest down towards your waist. That part alone has irregularities when stitching because the fabric doesn't match itself quite well. And that has to be done by a human being. That's the reason why you see mass fashion still going on in, mass fashion factories still going on in India and all these other places, because it still requires a human hand to sew those seams. No machine can do it today. You can say that many things have been automized. I would say yes, for straight lines. But unless we go back to the 18th century and start wearing dresses like Marie Antoinette, we cannot make clothes with straight lines. You'll be surprised. The 18th century clothing, the big, fancy, beautiful dresses you see in the French court, were made with nothing but straight lines. That's because sewing machine never existed back then. It was all made by hand. And because it was made by hand, the seams are very straight. People just sat down and sewed straight lines all day long. That was what happened in the 1700s. But things have changed because of the Victorian era, because of the invention of the sewing machine. People wanted to actually flaunt the wealth of having the capability to own a sewing machine. And so because of that, all the patterns became secular. Everything became circles. And because everything became circles, you now need a human hand to put it on a sewing machine and sew circles. And because you needed to do that, modern wear, whatever we're wearing today, are all based on Victorian patterning, not on the 18th century. They were all based on the 19th century, the time where having a sewing machine was considered luxury. And we are still flaunting that abundance and wealth today. We're still almost abusing the sewing machine just because we know we can have the sewing machine. But that's something that used to be, and I think that needs to change because 18th century, 18th century clothes are also very beautiful, but they're all made with straight lines. Like how the Japanese kimono is also being made with straight lines, because they're ancient clothes. And people in the past, fabric was expensive. Unlike today, fabrics were really expensive, and only the wealthy can afford those fabrics. So because of that, people did not waste fabric, unlike today. As mentioned, all our patterns were from the Victorian times, and because of that, wastage was considered luxury. And today's mass fashion is still based on that very notion that wastage equals luxury. It's really sad, but it's true that mass fashion still goes with that logic, whereas nowadays it's considered luxurious to save fabric, to make it made to measure. It's kind of like the opposite, like how things got swapped around when it comes to eras. Back then, wasting was great. Today is like, oh, saving is great. But it would be nice if people go back to how ancient people were and actually, take care of the fabrics and really pick the right fabrics and be more conscious about the fabrics they use, as opposed to, how we just wastage, just throw them all out like we did in the Victorian times just because we could. But yeah, that's where it came from. If you wanted to know why we have so much issues with fashion today, it's because everything was from the Victorian times. Yeah.
When we started doing circular patterns and affording the wastage.
Yeah, primarily because of the sewing machine.
Yes. Yeah. I was actually wondering to ask you another question, because recently there was a huge trend of 3D printing and 3D printing your own clothes as well. Do you see this as an upcoming technological advancement, or is it fading out? What's your point of view on that?
Actually, the notion of 3D printing has been around for quite a while. It's been around for about 12 years now. It's not something new. Back during the times when I was studying in London, already we dabbled with 3D printing for fabrics. At the point of time, the technology was still not very advanced. Today it's a little bit more advanced. That said, I do not think that the fabrics that are made through that 3D printing process, in terms of dresses and so on, will hold up as well as if you were to have to recreate them by hand or recreate them in a make-to-measure situation. Because the costs right now, this does not justify the ends. The cost of the 3D printing, you might as well just get a really skilled tailor up in Italy to make that for you. But should there one day be that the cost of 3D printing gets cheaper, and the fabrics that have been created from 3D printing, or the dresses that have been made from 3D printing, actually do hold up, there's a little bit of an issue with that. It's because of the materials that are being used into the 3D printing process. But if that can get better, I would still give it about 10 or 15 years at least for it to get somewhere. But yeah, it could be something. But there is something else that we dabble with. There's something that I'm not sure if people actually heard about this before. It's water-soluble fabrics. Water-soluble. You can actually take the fabric, put it into water, and it just dissolves. And then from the dissolved solution, you can recreate the same fabric again, flat and straight. I know it's crazy, but that's been done before. It's been done at the Sustainability Fashion Institute at London College of Fashion in London. That's where I went to see this process. It's done by a few chemical engineers, and they managed to do so. These fabrics are actually made from water-soluble fibers, and then the minute they come in contact with water, they start dissolving at a slow rate. And so whatever colors and patterns you put on top of it will also just dissolve into the water. And when you dry them up, just dry the water, everything comes back again into one straight piece with nothing on. Where can we use this? This is where it comes in. If you were to do fashion or have done sewing before, you will know this thing we use for sampling called calico. So calico is kind of like a recycled cotton that we use for forming dress forms. Like if you go to see the shows in Dior and all that, they have these forms, these fashion forms. So they're basically no real fabrics. It's just this piece of calico that has the shape of the dress fully made on it. We call that a toile. These toiles that are on the mannequins, they are all created using this calico. Calico is used because it's the cheapest thing and it's recyclable. But what calico can't do is that we waste so much of them. And they still take up a lot of water to, generate and recycle these calico pieces. And we throw out so much of them because we have to cut, we have to trial and error, we have to test. So all these pieces just keep getting thrown out. I think of a huge roll, about 500 kg of calico, we probably throw out about 100, 120 kilos. So it's like 1/5 of that fabric's just gone. Those times is when you really look at the fabrics and go, can't fashion be a little bit more environmentally friendly? I mean, you ask for solutions, right? And it pains us to have to throw them away. But there's absolutely nothing we can do about them because we need to test and trial and error these pieces. So where I see this water-soluble fabric coming in is in this particular instance, where you actually can recycle the fabric and then put them together. So scrap pieces could just be thrown into the water and it can then generate one straight piece and flat again. And we can use the piece and do trials again. So that's something that was absolutely revolutionizing. Unfortunately, the cost does not justify the use of it. The process of drying that solution is extremely cost ineffective. So there really wasn't much we could do. I mean, fashion has and is still a very polluting industry, and we have tried our best to minimize the pollution from that. So if you go to H&M and you see these clothing on the racks that says H&M Conscience, that's not very conscious at all, because I know what goes into that. It's only conscious in what the fabrics are. The fabrics are more organic. The fabrics have been sourced well. They have been sourced not from, inhumane factories, but that does not mean that that thing you buy is not polluting to the environment. It's extremely, extremely polluting just in the making process alone. Not to mention the fabric construction, not to mention the threads, not to mention the people that sews that thing together. So everything is not very ethical. But that's exactly what the fashion industry really is. Mass fashion industry, I have to stress, the mass fashion industry. The haute couture or the made-to-measure industries are very, very ethical, because they pay the people, they pay the craftsmen, everyone gets their fair share. Yeah, it does cost, but good things cost money. So it's really difficult to bring that idea across to people, because mass fashion has been such a revolutionizing concept to us. It's brought so many people the accessibility to so many designs and clothes. You can buy things, for cheap. I mean, I'm also a victim of that. I mean, we go to H&M and be like, oh, this is so cheap to avoid. This is so good, it's so cheap, I just have to have it. I understand that as well, because not every one of us can just go out there and spend $2,000 on a freaking dress. But but if you think about that, really investing in timelessness, like how the ancients used to do, how the people in the past used to treat their clothes, having a little bit of concept, a little bit of awareness to that would also really help us. It's kind of like the concept of, being vegan, or the concept of being vegetarian. It would be the same, where each one of us live by our set of rules and say that, I would like to limit my wardrobe to only having this amount of mass fashion wear. And that will really help the industry to reduce the waste. Reducing demand reduces the waste. It will also help the large companies to realize that demands have shifted away from mass fashion towards something a bit more customizable, a bit more tailored to each and every one of us. So I think that is a good signal, and I really do hope and encourage people to send that signal, because the fashion industry is picking it up. Nowadays, it's very different from how I first used to when we went to London, Primark and all that, making so much money. They are to themselves realizing that people do not want mass-produced stuff anymore. There is this strong notion that consciousness must count. Ethical makings and ethical wear has to be the next fashion. So they themselves are now picking up on that. So I do hope that people keep up this trend, so that companies would say, okay, now we have to put some priorities into our ethics. That would really, really help the industry in general.
Absolutely. Yep. And people shouldn't forget the fact that it may cost a little in the beginning, but it definitely pays off. In the long run, it pays off.
Definitely. Yes.
Actually, we've been talking for almost about an hour so far, and the time just flew. But I would really like to move to one section that I always do during my interviews, and it is fill in the blankets. So I have come up with 5 statements to you, and I will read the beginning, and you have to finish it with your opinion.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll try.
Nice. So, okay, and then let's start with the first one. To me, sustainability is?
That's a very difficult one. To me, sustainability is no wastage.
Very strong, very strong.
Yeah.
Second one. One thing I would like to see more of in the world is?
Made-to-measure clothing. 100%.
Yay!
Definitely.
Yay for you.
People need to go back to how it used to be. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Next one. For a complete beginner in the sustainability area, I would like to suggest to start off with.
That's a really good one. Buying timeless pieces. So buy maybe a shirt, a white one or black one that you can use for at least 7 different looks. Just start with that. Not hard, but yes. 7 different pieces, 7 looks. Just go for 7 looks, 1 piece. If that piece cannot go for 7 different looks, don't buy it. That's all.
So buying looks instead of pieces as well.
Yeah, buy the looks, buy the piece that it can give you 7 different looks. Yes.
Awesome. That's a very good one.
That's what I would do. Yep.
The 4th one, every sustainable business.
Every sustainable business, or having a sustainable business? Every
sustainable business is or should, or maybe challenges.
Okay. Every sustainable business must give priority to ethical production. That is extremely important to me. Yes, ethical production is extremely important. Ethics is a choice. I do not feel that ethics is something that's a supplementary or an addition. Ethics has to be a choice. It has to be a priority for a company. So ethical decision making and ethical production. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. The last statement. In 2 to 3 years, I see fashion industry.
2 to 3 years. I see fashion industry booming in the East. I'm sorry. It's so difficult to say. But it's true. The rise of China is a dragon we do not want, but it's a dragon that will come no matter what. So yes, in 2 to 3 years, the fashion industry will shift demand to Asia. And so it's extremely important that we stand on the forefront and educate people on ethicalness and on fashion production that's more ethical in nature. Because the Chinese, I wouldn't say they don't have a concept of that, but that's not their priority. So we do start off with this is going to be the standard, then they will pick it up. And they're really good at picking things up. So they will pick it up. And then that would be a revolutionizing trend, would be the Chinese industry and the Chinese fashion industry just going towards ethical production. That would be my dream. But that would also, I hope, be what fashion industry will be 2 to 3 years from now, because they are such huge supporters of made to measure. Chinese people do not want to buy mass fashion. That's because everyone has it. Mass fashion is everywhere in China. It's not special anymore. So made to measure, they are on the forefront of it. I know so many middle class, not wealthy Chinese, middle class Chinese who are already looking into customizing. I want my own dress. I want my own things. I don't want mass fashion, because everyone has mass fashion in China. Everyone has it. So made to measure, they are really on the forefront. And I really hope fashion industry will go towards that direction, will be spearheaded with that. And I hope the rest of the world will really support them and will also be inspiration figures towards the Chinese fashion industry to say that ethics is the key to anything in fashion, and that make to measure will be the next trend. That would be my wish. 2 to 3 years. Hope that happens.
I hope that will come true. Definitely.
Yeah.
I am a strong supporter on this one too. And I think we noticed the rise of Chinese market at the moment, Asian market in general. So if there was any lesson that they could take from us, let it be this, that they should start with the fashion industry from a better standard, so to say.
Yeah, really hope so. The mass fashion there, I've seen for myself because I'm an avid user of Taobao. I would say that mass fashion there, they don't really quite have a concept of that, because everything needs to be cheap and quick. And that's something that the Chinese really, really go for. Cheap and fast, quick, really good production. But I think there is a very large fraction of them that is growing, especially the top tier spearheaders in the Chinese industry and the Chinese market. They're the ones who really aim for customization. They're the ones who really go for luxury at its finest. So they're really going back to ancient value systems of how a luxury should be, which is made to measure, which is properly sourced ingredients, top quality ingredients. That said, there's still a lot of pain when it comes to wearing animal clothing in terms of like animal skins and so on. That's a little bit of a trend backward, but I really hope that people could inspire the Chinese to push forward with more ethical consumption of fashion materials, debuting the use of animal skins, because I do not feel that that's necessary at all. But you know, that it's a concept that needs time to change. So really hope that the West will be able to influence the East when it comes to that. And I to myself hope to bring that trend back to the East and say, this is a new way of fashion where everything is conscious, where everything is ethical, and that ethics is the next level of class. That would primarily be the main takeaway, I hope, to people, would be that ethical clothing is the next level of class. And that, to be considered classy, go for the ethics. That would be like the primary aim. And that would be really something I hope that the world would pick up on, even for myself. Yeah.
Totally.
Thank you.
So the 3 key takeaways, just to summarize our conversation, what would you say you would like everyone to take out as 3 key main points?
Would like everyone to become inspirational figures, spearheaders of ethical wear, and then also to be conscious about what you buy, because remember that threads are really, really polluting. Also, if you could, do support the make-to-measure market. Currently, it is dying in many, many industries, except in luxury fashion, for the only 0.1% of the world that can support it. But for the rest of us, you will be very surprised that make-to-measure is actually not that expensive. And there are many people out there who are willing to make your shirt for a fraction of the price as compared to you buying some branded suit out there. Go ahead, look for your local tailor, have them customize it for you, because those clothing are made with such love. They will last so long, and they will be timeless in terms of its patterning.
And you will feel the difference. You will feel the love and emotion put into the clothing, and you will also want to maintain it and make it last longer.
Yes.